At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce today's featured speaker, Walker Lundy. Walker Lundy, a newspaper veteran of more than 25 years, was named Executive Editor and Senior Vice President for the St. Paul Pioneer Press in 1990. The Pioneer Press, a Knight Ridder newspaper, has received many awards over the years, including two, tell me the, Pulitzer. Practice that one. It's kind of like laurels. Pulitzer. See, I knew I heard it two different ways. Okay, prizes. Okay. Really big awards, right, Walker?
Yeah.
Really big. Okay. And this year, the Pioneer Press's sports, business, and religious sections have been recognized as being among the best in the nation. In addition, for the 6th consecutive year, the Pioneer Press has won the Twin Cities' foremost public service journalism award, the Premack Award, named after a former Minneapolis Tribune editor and reporter. Walker is a native of St. Petersburg, Florida, and a graduate of the University of Florida in Gainesville. He began his newspaper career as a reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He later was a reporter and city editor at the Detroit Free Press. He was Metro editor and executive editor at the Tallahassee Democrat for 9 years. Walker was managing editor at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and editor of the Arkansas Gazette in Little Rock before coming to St. Paul. He and his wife, Sarah Lynn, have a son and a daughter who is a reporter in the Palm Beach Bureau of the Sun Centennial. Please join me in welcoming Walker Lundy.
Good morning. I had no idea people came to work at this hour. You have to understand this is afternoon newspaper hours. Morning newspaper hours start a little later in the day. So if I, in the middle of this talk, cease to make any sense at all, you can just sort of chalk that up to the hours that I'm accustomed to versus the hour this is. But I'm really happy for the opportunity to talk to you all, and I bring you greetings from across the Great Water. From St. Paul, Minnesota, which is the home of the St. Paul Saints, the Minnesota Wild, soon perhaps the Twins, Garrison Keillor, the husband of Terry Ventura, and we are the birthplace of the shopping bag. That's pretty much all the things that St. Paul is known for. You're supposed to begin a talk like this, particularly at 5 minutes after 8 in the morning, with a joke, and I have a terrific joke that I hope you think is terrific. You remember Peekaboo Street, the Olympic skier. You know, she's going to have an intensive care unit at the hospital in St. Paul named after her. That's true, they're going to call it the Peekaboo ICU. Well, it's 5 minutes after 8. If you hear that story later in the day, it's better. I want to talk a few minutes about what we at the Pioneer Press think the role of a newspaper is, and then talk a little bit about our role in Wisconsin. There are a number of ways that you can describe what a newspaper does. One way is it's the first rough draft of history. I like some of the traditional cliches about our business. One is that our job is to print the truth and raise hell. And I have to say, in the recent Gopher story, I think we managed to accomplish both of those goals. Another description that I like is that it's our job to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I think that is our job. But more seriously, it's our job to help democracy function. There's a reason why the amendment that talks about us in the Constitution is the First Amendment. And that's because the Founding Fathers understand that for a democracy to function, people have to have information. They have to know the truth about what their government's doing. But it's also our job to help people learn. It's never been more true than it's going to be in the 21st century that information is power. And there's no place that you can get more information about what is happening in the world around you today than from a newspaper, any newspaper. But it's also our job to stir people, to entertain them, to comfort them, and to give people a sense of the community in which they live. But we're also a business, and it's our job to connect buyers and sellers, and that's what some of the folks sitting at the Pioneer Press table today do. But more and more today, it's also our job to make sure that we don't bore people. Traditionally, newspapers could say, we're going to put all the news in there, and it's just going to be in black and white, and the ink's going to come off on your hands, and the paper may be wet when you get there, but now, dear reader, it's your job to sort of pry the information out. And when I was a boy, that worked. because people didn't have the choices that they have today. Today, people's attention spans have shrunk to about like that, and we must be interesting and compelling or people don't read us. Some people want to know if we're narrators of the news, interpreters, or just actors in the political process. And the answer is, from time to time, we're all those things. We do narrate, we do tell you what's happened in your world yesterday. Sometimes we discover what's happened on our own and we tell you that. But it's also our job to interpret and help explain to you what the news means and how indeed it does affect you. That's something that television just can't do because they're hemmed in by the god of time. They don't really have very much time to talk to you. So it's our job to tell you why something happened, what's the story behind the story, and if we're really doing our job, what seems likely to happen next. And I grant you the line between interpretation and opinion sometimes is a very thin one, and occasionally if we skate over that, we get in trouble with our readers because they want interpretation. They're much less interested in what our opinions are. We try to avoid being actors in the news, but some people are very good at yanking our chain, and sometimes it's tough to avoid. We're now being boycotted by one of the hotels in St. Paul because we wrote a story. They also run a restaurant at a different location, and we wrote a story quoting their chef who had quit and was leaving, and he wasn't entirely complimentary of the management, so they got mad and pulled the newspapers. Northwest Airlines has boycotted us and the Strip at least 3 times in the 9 years I've been here because they would be angry at something that we had written, but we always make up and they come back. And sometimes we just step in it on our own. When the governor calls a press conference and calls us despicable, it's pretty hard not to find yourself in the center of the story. As Mary Claire mentioned, we're 150 years old this year. We celebrated our 150th birthday in April. And I read in preparation for a column I did a lot about the history of the paper, and it's a wonderful history. One of the things that in probably our least proud moments, we spun off a newspaper that grew up to become the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. And we sort of have to admit that up front. But they're kind of a Johnny-come-lately when it comes to covering Minnesota. We're older than the city of St. Paul. We're older than the state of Minnesota. And when you think about it, the pages of the Pioneer Press in 150 years have reported on the Civil War. We've reported on the sinking of the Titanic. We've reported on the Depression. All the events that have happened not only in your lives, but in your parents' lives, your grandparents' lives, and in some cases your great-grandparents' lives, appeared in the pages of the Pioneer Press. The first editor, James Madison Goodhue, who had my job 150 years ago, wrote something about a local judge that made the judge so angry that he sent his brother after the editor with a gun. And he was going to shoot him, but Mr. Goodhue got the draw first, and they managed to wound each other, but nobody got killed. And I'm mindful of the fact that I come out of a very sort of a long tradition of tough, two-fisted gun-shooting editors. But as long as the governor just sticks to words, I'll be okay. But I have to tell you, unlike Mr. Goodhue, I am susceptible to physical threats. We have come an enormous way, as you might imagine, in 150 years. We've even come a long way in the 9 years that I've been fortunate enough to be the editor of this paper, and we continue to change. In the last 9 years, we've created 25 new beats on the paper, and I want to just skip through some of them because they give you a sense of not only how we're changing, but how the lives of our readers are changing. We've created a technology team of reporters that didn't exist 9 years ago. We have a reporter who covers the business of sports and entertainment. We have someone who covers the workplace and family issues. We have a women in business reporter. We have Laura Billings as a columnist. There were no women columnists in 1990. We have neighborhood reporters in the Twin Cities because that's what readers told us they wanted. We have a restaurant reporter along with a restaurant critic. We have an aging and gender beat, a nature and recreation beat. We have a public safety beat, family and children beat. We've added a second religion writer, a pop music writer, a Wisconsin reporter, just one, but we didn't have one 9 years ago. An investigations team that's deeply involved in something called computer-assisted reporting. We have a bureau in Minneapolis with 3 reporters in it, and we have a dozen reporters in the suburbs, and we have the Pioneer Planet now, which of course we didn't have. We're trying to go broader and deeper with our news coverage than we've done before. We're also actively involved in something called public journalism. And the premise of that basically is that we look upon the readers not as spectators in the democratic process, but as participants in the democratic process. And we try very hard as we're reporting the news to tell people, here's where you can get involved, here's where you can make a difference, here's the person you need to call for information, which we didn't do very well 8 or 9 years ago. We won a major national award for public journalism called the James K. Batten Award for a big project we did last year called Poverty Among Us, that looked at the impact of the changes of welfare reform. We got 2,500 people in the community involved in doing individual acts to try and help people who were fighting the chains of poverty. We've also expanded our community news and our business news. Now for this year we have 4 goals that we've adopted. The first one is credibility, because we know from talking to readers that we're not accurate enough often enough. We make mistakes. Often they're kind of the head-slapping mistakes that you look at the next day and you think, well, what was I thinking? How did that get through 3 people and into the paper? But it succeeded, but it did. And we're working hard to try and improve our accuracy, not only with the facts that we report, but also the nuance and the context and the larger things. And I do have to mention one of my all-time favorite corrections, which appeared in the Twin Cities newspaper, Not Ours, just this last Friday. And the correction, I think I can recite word for word now. It said, Elmer Fudd was misidentified as Porky Pig in a caption in our variety section yesterday. And of course the speculation in the Pioneer Press newsroom is who called? Was it Elmer or was it Porky? But sure enough, we were quite eager when we found it. We went back and sure enough, they screwed it up. But we do corrections. We haven't misidentified Porky for Elmer yet, but we've done some ones that were close to that. And we're working hard to improve that. Our second goal is solutions journalism, because we know that our readers have said, you know, we have enough problems in our lives that we don't have solutions for. What we look for a newspaper for are some solutions. Now, they don't want us to recommend the solution. They just want to know what things are working. And today's paper is a good example. To make the point with readers, we adopted a little logo with a key on it and the word solution. It's not very subtle, but it's what we're after. And this is an example of how a community in the Twin Cities is coming together to keep a school going while it's facing repeated vandalism. And the community sort of come together and they're raising money. And that for us is a solution. We sometimes have stories. In fact, there was one last week that made me tear my hair out that was on page 1. There was a wire story that said because people are taking more and more medication, that more and more pharmacists are making mistakes and giving people either the wrong drug or giving them drugs that have side effects and so forth. And I read the story and there was no solution in the story. And I came in and talked to the editor and I said, what good does it do me to know that? It's one more problem that according to the newspaper, I have no way to solve. I don't need more problems that I can't solve. I'm looking for solutions. It's sort of the every kind of food causes cancer syndrome. At some point you just sort of give up and say, well, I can't keep track of it all and there's nothing I can do, and so I'll just eat what I'm going to eat and not worry about it. Our job, we think, in part, is to help you sort of sort through all of that and to the degree that you can, take control of your life. The third goal is hell-raising journalism, because we think that's a major job of ours, to write stories that raise Cain with people and expose wrongdoing when they find it. And the fourth thing is we call quick read. I think we're a very good newspaper today if you have an hour. There's a lot of news in there. I take more than an hour every day to carefully read the paper, and I think we do a good job. If you only have 10 or 15 minutes, which is increasingly what people have, they may have 10 or 15 minutes at breakfast and another 10 or 15 minutes at lunch, but they're in a hurry. We're not a very good quick read newspaper, and we're in the process this year of trying to improve that. I think we have come a long way, but we have a long ways to go. One of the chief complaints that I hear about the Pioneer Press, I hear from people who live in Wisconsin, and they express outrage that we don't have more Wisconsin coverage. And there are days that we have no Wisconsin coverage, as some of you who read the paper know. And I'll tell you why, and tell you that we hope soon to be able to change that. 1987, the Star Tribune came across the river and declared itself to be the newspaper of the Twin Cities, and our paper got really nervous. The Star Tribune said, now, of course, we're not trying to put you out of business, and generally when somebody tells you that, that's exactly what they're trying to do. And so we circled the wagons, and we said, we are the hometown newspaper for Ramsey, Dakota, and Washington County. Some of our staff who lives in Minneapolis, they want us to go across the river and the other river and deliver the paper in Minneapolis. And we've pretty much resisted that. When you're the smaller dog in the fight, your job is to stick to the knitting. And I believe then, and I still believe, that the newspaper war is going to be won or lost in Ramsey, Dakota, and Washington County. And so we circled our wagons and we said, we're going to own that. That was in 1990. And I did a column in 1998 on the 10th anniversary of the invasion, and I went back and got a story from 87, and it quoted the advertising director of Donaldson's department store as saying, you know, this is not good news. In 10 years we could be a one newspaper town. Of course, as it turned out, 10 years later we were a one department store town. We were still a two newspaper town. And if you had said in 1987, in 10 years one of these newspapers is going to get sold, not many people would have thought it was the Star Tribune. So we just declared victory and said, fine, we own Ramsey, Dakota, and Washington County, and now it's time to look around and see where else we can go. And one of the places we can go is western Wisconsin. We sell 30,000 papers over here, and we think we can sell more. Our advertising step this week is sort of our first step to do that. Gary Dawson, who is our one reporter over here, we've had a bureau here probably 5 or 6 years, I guess, and we have some columnists and we have the Associated Press. We're looking between now and the end of the year to figure out a way to augment that coverage and to do a better job. It's kind of a schizophrenic personality over here, because I also hear from people who say, you're sending me the Wisconsin edition, and yes, I live in Hudson, but I work in the Twin Cities, and I take a St. Paul paper because I want a St. Paul paper. And then we hear from folks who say, don't you know we live in Wisconsin? We don't want a St. Paul paper, we want a Wisconsin paper. And so we're trying to balance both of those needs, but I think we'll be able to do a better job with it. There's one other thing I want to talk about for a minute, because it's the thing the last couple of months that I've been asked about the most, and then stop for, and I'm not quite sure what our timing is, but I hope for some questions. And I would tell you in advance, this is the time, if you've ever sat at your breakfast table and said, why on earth do those people do that, or why did they do this? This is the time for you not to be a polite Wisconsinite, but to ask the question you've always wanted to ask the person who takes responsibility for that, whatever that bonehead thing is that we did. So I would encourage you to be frank and ask the question you really want to ask, rather than the polite questions, although I'll take the polite questions too. And the last thing I want to talk about is the gopher story. We've been accused of being racist. We've been accused of timing the story just to break the hearts of the governor and Minnesotans. A number of people have accused us of trying to destroy a wonderful community institution. The critics have complained about all those things, except not many of them mention the central fact of the story, which is the University of Minnesota, the pride of Minnesota, may be guilty of the greatest academic fraud in the history of the NCAA. And it dawned on me the other day, as I was listening to a radio program where we were being really accused, not only of being a racist, but of targeting Clem Haskins and McKinley Boston because they were black. That's really, it was a conspiracy to get them. It dawned on me that even if we were guilty of all the things that we were accused of, it still pales when compared to what the University of Minnesota has been accused of. I'm encouraged by the way Mark Udoff has launched the investigation. I think he wants to get to the truth. One of the key witnesses now has taken the Fifth Amendment, so there's some question about how close to the truth they're going to be able to get. But I'm an optimist by nature, and I think that they will get to the truth. The timing thing, if you still have questions about that, All I can tell you is what I wrote in my column, which was we printed the story when it was ready. We couldn't print it before, and we didn't think it was ethical to hold it. And for me, it's a little like confronting an employee who's been stealing from your company on the eve of the company picnic and having the employees say, oh, geez, this is great. Now I'm not going to be able to enjoy the picnic. But, and the other question that nobody asks is, what about a university that would use young black athletes and then toss them aside without the tools to succeed in life? That's a very important issue, and one that I think the university is in the process of confronting. So that's what I came to say, and if that's not enough, I can repeat my Peekaboo Street joke again. Now, what are your questions? Yes?
Have you ever thought of sending a reporter to Madison?
No.
Would you ever consider that?
If we were going to, let's say we were going to invest, well, let's say we're going to invest a second reporter over here. Would you send them over here, or would you send them to Madison?
Well, I guess I like a good balance. Because I think, as you pointed out, I think Western Wisconsin is a pretty good customer of the Pioneer Press. And I would really like to see more Wisconsin coverage. I'm one of those people that have written and called you on a couple of occasions.
Thank you for the feedback. That's an interesting question, and I think we have to get to the point where first we feel like we're doing at least an adequate job of sort of greater Western Wisconsin. But I know that the people over here, because a number of people have told me, you sort of feel ignored by, I mean, it's a long way from Milwaukee and it's a long way from Madison. And so maybe that's something we should do. One of the first things I suspect we'll do is cover high school sports over here, because that will sell more papers faster than probably anything else we could do. But frankly, I hadn't thought about it, and that's a good point. At some point we should do that. Yes, sir.
I'd follow up on that too. It's a very good question. Matt Palmer has a somewhat twisted view of life in Madison, so I think that would be a good investment. I've lived in Hudson now since 1986, and as you mentioned, it's 15 miles to St. Paul and 230 miles to Madison. And with respect to the other media, television, we're always getting the Twin Cities view.
You know more about Minnesota government than you do Wisconsin government, I suspect.
Yes.
I thought life in Madison was twisted.
That's right. But and again, the sports I think is pretty significant. Just the fact now that the Hudson girls soccer team's going to the state tournament, which starts this Thursday. That's important.
Yep. We know that sells newspapers. People really, there's some things you want in a newspaper because it needs to be there, and there are other things that are what we call buy decisions, BUI. They're only about 30 to 35% of our readers read the sports section, but they read it with great passion. And if we have a good sports section, that sells more newspapers than if we have a good weather report or a good TV listing or a good something else. So 2 votes for Madison. Thank you. 3.
I came from the other part of the state back in '85, and the biggest thing I found when I got here is I did not know what was going on. I was cut off.
Now, I would think you would want us to work on the investigation of local public officials. But you'd rather us go to Madison.
They have more power.
Probably more corruption. Yes. Who's next? Yes.
With all the publicity about violence in the schools and things like that, maybe share with us some of your, let's say, ethical type of discussion as far as how much promotion to give, and then the whole copycat syndrome that I think has happened in the Twin Cities.
Yeah, that's a real hard case for us, and we did spend time when the Columbine shooting happened talking about how to play the story. The editor of the Chicago Sun-Times has taken a position that violence by young people he's not going to put on the front of his newspaper. And so he was the only newspaper in the United States, I'm sure, that played the Columbine shooting inside. And he got great reaction from lots of his readers. And my question was, I'd still like to see the single copy sales from the Chicago Tribune and the Sun-Times the next day, because while people on the one hand worry about the same things we worry about, on the other hand, really want information, and they want accurate information about stories like that. We tried to apply our solutions belief to that story, which is about as hard an assignment as you can do. But in a day or so, as the fallout of the shooting started becoming a little clear, we wrote lots of stories directed at parents, because this was the kind of story that, while it happened across the country in Colorado, it really landed on the breakfast table of every family who has children of any age at all. I mean, you felt it was a personal story. And so we spent a lot of time directing stories both at parents and at young people about things that they could do. And I think we were pretty successful at doing that. The other thing we did, we have a critique every morning, and about day 3 or day 4, we were sort of self-congratulating ourselves for how many trees we had killed telling the story. And one of the editors said, you know, I agree with all that, but I really wish we could hear from somebody other than us. And so that sort of took on a life of its own. And a few days later, we had a brown bag lunch where we invited in a half dozen people who knew more about young people than any of us. And we had the principal from Central High School, and we had a couple of people who work with emotionally disturbed young people, and we had some counselors, and we had the president of the state PTA. And we said, okay, you read our coverage, tell us what you thought. And they were very candid, and in some instances critical of what we did. And one of the points that they made was, take great care with the images, with the photographs that you run. You should run the stories and run in-depth stories, but what young people tend to look at quickly are the images, the pictures, and the captions. And that may be very apparent to some of you who have teenage children, but it was like a light bulb going off for most of us. And we were very mindful. The other point they made was the glorification of it all. We had run a picture of the casket of one of the young women who had been killed, and they had the young people had all signed their names to the casket, and we had run that picture. And a couple of the people on the panel were very critical of that, because they said this tends to romanticize what happened, and that's not a good thing to do. And I have to say, since then, in the news meetings that we're in, that panel really has affected how we look at the story. So I guess we sort of want to do both things. We want to be responsible, and we certainly don't want to publish things that are going to encourage this sort of behavior. At the same time, our job is to make sure, terrible as the story is, that we have given you all of the information that we can about it, so that you don't say, gee, I heard it was this and I heard it was that, but you know the truth. If somebody's going to be critical of the Pioneer Press, and my choices are for you to say you publish too much information or you publish too little information, I would rather you be unhappy with us because we publish too much than too little. At least at that point you can know, okay, I trust the newspaper. Sometimes they go overboard, but they tell us what they know. And finally, when you get through thinking about it, it's not the printing press or the list of subscribers or the people who work for the newspaper that are the most important thing we have. It's our reputation. If you believe what you see in the newspaper, we'll be a healthy business. At the point where you begin to wonder and you stop believing what you read in the newspaper, then we're in trouble. And most people, it's sort of like Congress. When you ask people about Congress or you ask people about the news media, lots of people say, well, they're crooked and they're no damn good. But when you say, well, what about the newspaper you read, or what about your member of Congress, people in our surveys give us pretty high marks for credibility, not high enough to suit us. But that's something that we really guard, and something that can be damaged in a story like Columbine. Yes?
Two things quick.
I know you, no comment.
I'm interested in you talk about the evolution of newsprint or the packaging. Where do you see us in 5 to 10 years with the internet? A whole new outlet. The second thing, how do you feel about your local media picking up the Pioneer Press and reading your stories on the air in the morning? I frequently hear unattributed stories that I just read in the Pioneer Press on NPR and many of the
privately owned station.
Sometimes you can almost hear the newspaper rattling in the background as they fold the pages. The truth is that as members of the Associated Press, which we are, they pick up our stories, and so most of what you hear on the radio is legit because they have the AP service, but it does pain me, particularly, I know this affects reporters too, when you've done a story and it's your quote, you're the only person that interviewed the person, wasn't a press conference, you got the interview, and then you hear the quote read back to you on the TV news the next morning. That is galling, and I can tell you, if you miss the newspaper in the morning, you can see snatches of those stories on the evening news because we're sort of their tip sheet. I'm not sure they would know what to cover if they didn't have the Star Tribune and your paper and the Pioneer Press and others to read. The internet is a big question. If I really knew the answer to that question, I'd have a better job than the one I've got, and I'd be rich. Nobody quite knows where the internet is going, which is what's so fascinating about the story. The biggest threat to newspapers is the classified advertising, which can be done much more efficiently on the internet. The only thing holding it back now is kind of a critical mass of users. About half of our readers now have internet access, which is pretty astounding because if you look 5 years ago, it would be virtually none. I mean, it's happened very quickly, faster than any communications revolution in the history of humankind. I think 5 years from now, you'll see more what they call e-commerce, which is buying and selling stuff over the internet. But newspapers will be very healthy, and we'll have a piece of the internet because we know a lot about the gathering and disseminating information that Yahoo doesn't know. If you take it on further, out 15 or 20 years, I think your children will live to see the day when when newspapers aren't done the way they're done now, which is very inefficient. We've got this big old clanky press. It costs millions of dollars. We gin all these papers out. We got this army of people that put them in their cars and they drive them all over and they walk up to your doorstep, hopefully, and they put it down, which is about I mean, what other product can you get delivered to your doorstep on that kind of consistent basis? Not many. And I think your children will live to see the day, and I don't know whether it be a flat panel thing that you sort of, I don't know, point at the sky to get instant input from some satellite, or whether, I don't know what the form will be, a printer in your house. They just put a printer on the market now for $79. But I think your children will live to see the day where it's sort of like leaded gasoline, where it's just kind of an anachronism. But I think most of us will be able to clutch our newspaper to our bosom for most of our adult life. I don't know about you, but I get 30, 40 emails a day, and I still print them all out just because I need to sort of clutch that piece of paper. I feel better if it's a piece of paper. But that's I mean, nobody knows. I guess I should have given the shorter answer to that. Those are the only complaints about the Pioneer Press? Okay.
Except we know you'll write more now about Hudson in the area, now that you've been here.
We're turning our entire investigative team loose on Hudson.
No. Who said that?
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Walker, for your comments and for all of the hard work that the Pioneer Press does. And they are increasing their coverage in the Hudson area. I don't know if it helps that I call Gary Dawson every day or every other day, but they are doing that. Well, I let him know. Then he kind of goes, "Oh, Mary." And I'm like, "Just write it." Okay, I'm going to invite Scott up because we're going to do the drawing. And maybe, Scott, you can tell him what the drawing's for.
This morning we are giving away a quarter-page ad in the zone of your choice in our new zoned advertising program. And that could be for the western Wisconsin zone or any of our zones over in Minnesota, which would also include Washington County, which I know a lot of Hudson businesses are interested in. So with that, I'm going to pass this box over to Mary. Select a winner.
West Industries, Helen. So come on up. We're going to do a little photo. What are you giving her, Scott? Wait, I can get Walker in there if you guys just partner. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Thank you. And again, please feel free to stop back on your way out and pick up a 150th commemorative edition.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Thank you again to our sponsor of today's program, the Pioneer Press, and to Walker for speaking today. And thank you all for coming. I look forward to seeing you at the next Good Morning Hudson, which will be August 10th, but we have a number of events before that.